No angel, no hero, demonizing victims. Way back in 2014, there occurred the Michael Brown no angel controversy. You might recall Michael Brown. He was an unarmed teenager who was shot to death in Ferguson, Missouri on August 9. And he was referred to as being no angel. And this became a point of controversy using that expression. Now, jumping ahead to 2020, we have George Floyd, an unarmed black man killed by a police officer, allegedly, sorry for the legal purposes. And we have the narrative has changed from no angel, perhaps because of the backlash from that, to the assertion of no hero by Candace Owens apparently leading the charge on this and asserting that George Floyd was no hero, despite the fact that no one seems to have claimed that he's actually a hero. And being murdered by the police in the street is generally not a heroic death. Now, also, President Trump has gone after Martin Gugino, whose name I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. What he was doing here was what we call demonizing. And what he's saying is that the gentleman who was pushed down on video, was fractured his skull, bleeding out of his ear, claiming that he could be an Antifa provocateur, and claiming, oddly, that he was trying to scan police communication equipment to black it out somehow. And he claimed that apparently that the victim of this assault was faking his fall. And this is what is known as demonizing. Now, as you might imagine, this shows up on Twitter and people's Facebook feeds and social media, where people will post various pictures, claiming, no angel, no hero, or retweeting Trump's tweet. So what's going on here? Well, part of it is speculation about psychological motives. And, this is a matter for psychologists, people who do sociology, anthropology, etc. But a lot of this sort of reproduction of it involves what is typically called virtue signaling, where a person is saying that they have these values, and they're signaling to other people in their same value set that they agree with this. Now, this could also be looked at as the opposite, namely vice signaling, essentially saying to other people that they are bad people because supporting murdering unarmed people with excessive force, supporting pushing 75-year-old protesters down so their skulls are cracked, in a way is a statement of being a bad person. So it could be seen as saying not, I'm virtuous like you, praise me, as signaling to people, I'm evil like you, praise me for my evil. Now, it can also be ideological signaling, where someone is saying to others, this is my view, this is my commitment, by saying that a victim of violence is no angel or no hero. They're making it clear where they stand. It's an ideological stance summed up with like a modified picture or some sort of meme. And of course, it could be pure trolling, because one way to get a response is to post something that is clearly pretty awful and just bask in the angry responses. Now, getting into some critical thinking, what these techniques, the no angel, no hero, and the demonizing do effectively is serve as what in the critical thinking business we call the red herring. It's a rhetorical device, which means it's logically inert. It does nothing logically, but it has psychological force. And its function is to do this, is to introduce a new issue to divert attention from the original issue. And so the idea is it's a distractor to move the conversation away from the original issue. So when they say of someone who was killed by the police that they're no angel, one function of this is to divert the attention from the killing to the character, background, actions of the victim. And the hope is presumably in part to switch the conversation So instead of looking at, say, systematic injustice or excessive force in policing, the issue becomes, is this person an angel or not? Totally separate issue. But the more people focus on the no angel issue, the less they address the more important issue, namely systematic racism, excessive use of violence in policing, and our whole approach to maintaining order in our society. Same thing with the no hero. The idea is to get the debate, discussion away from the bigger issues to focusing on the issue of, was this person a hero? And the same with demonizing. The idea is to switch it away from the issue of, should we have a police approach that allows shoving 75-year-old people to the ground and just leaving them there, seemingly without any provocation on the part of the person? Is that how we want policing to work? Switching it over to the issue of whether this person is, an Antifa agent. And by even talking about it, in a way, I'm kind of helping Trump here. Now, what about the demonizing part? Well, demonizing is a general rhetorical device. Again, it's psychologically powerful, but logically empty. It does nothing logically. So it involves portraying the target of demonizing as evil, using hyperbole, which is exaggeration, overstatement, or just complete fabrications. So hyperbole is lying, because it's untrue by definition, but it typically involves taking something that has some amount of truth to it and then exaggerating it, or overemphasizing it. Sort of either blowing it out of proportion, exaggerating, or having a very narrow focus, just looking, saying that someone is evil by focusing solely on negative things about them, ignoring everything else. And so it can be done by hyperbole, by complete lies, and this is used in a variety of ways. One is to kind of downplay what was done to a person. So the person who is, shoved to the ground and their skull was fractured, well, if they're demonized, then it's not so bad. I mean, they're a bad person, so that was, not so bad. Similarly, the people who were killed, if they're demonized, then it downplays the seriousness and badness of what was done to them. And there's also kind of an implied justification that since the person was bad, they perhaps deserved what was done to them. So what's the obvious criticism of demonizing? Well, the most obvious one is that, by definition, demonizing is untrue. It is at best hyperbole, and typically just outright lies. So defending against demonizing, pretty straightforward, to ask, is this true? Now there's also, behind this these techniques, no angel, no hero, and demonizing, is an attempt to invoke theories of punishment. And this takes us into the realm of ethics in terms of what justifies punishment. So what seems to be going on when people say they're no angel, or they're no hero, or say things like they were, Antifa, using a device to block police communications, one thing that can be going on here is this. There is a view of punishment that could be called, in crude terms, what was coming to them. And put in a kind of a formal bit, it looked like this. That premise 1, a person was bad because of certain things, P, Q, and R. Premise 2, they were killed by the police because of some other thing, X. Conclusion, the killing was justified. Put it informally, the idea would be the person was bad because of these qualities, they were killed or perhaps just hurt by the police because of some other thing, therefore it was justified. So, is this a good view of punishment? Is that good reasoning? Well, logically, in a way, there's not like an obvious logical flaw here, because if a person was bad and they were, killed because of doing some bad thing, then you could argue that the killing was justified. But there does seem to be, on the face of it, a bit of a problem here if you dig in a bit deeper. Because suppose it's true that a person was bad because of P, Q, and R, but they were killed because of X. So the question then arises, does X justify the killing? Because even if they were bad because of P, Q, and R, and they were killed because of something entirely different, well, no matter how bad they were because of P, Q, and R, the killing need not be justified. Now, you could bring up an argument that killing bad people or hurting bad people is okay because they're bad, no matter what they're doing. But here's some criticism of, this underlying, moral principle or immoral principle, depending on how you look at it. One obvious thing is due process. If we're looking at it both legally and morally, killing people or hurting people because they did other bad things, there is a question of, well, if they were killed because of X, and the justification is because they were bad because of some other things, was it actual due process? Does doing X justify killing someone without any, trial, without any due process? And in most cases, the answer is typically, well, no. I mean, it's one thing, obviously, if you have a case where someone is out engaged in a mass shooting, they're shooting up a school, and they're running at the police to shoot the police, and the police shoot them, we would say, yeah, that's justified. They're trying to they've killed all these people, they're trying to kill the officers. That would be, justified. But if someone said, well, it was okay to kill that person then because they were a bad person for other stuff, suppose you have someone who did a lot of other bad stuff, and they're stopped for, a speeding ticket, and then they're just executed in their car, well, that would seem to be kind of obviously unjustified, because no matter how bad they were, killing them over a parking violation, or a traffic stop, because they were going too fast, would seem to be unjustified. So it wouldn't matter how bad they were, just because they were bad doesn't mean that killing them now would be justified. And there's also the matter of proportionate punishment. We generally accept as a principle that the punishment should be matching to the misdeed. That if someone, is speeding, we don't think they should be executed on the side of the street for speeding. And if someone is shoplifting, we don't think that they should have an arm chopped off. Those are disproportional. Likewise, even if someone was doing something bad, killing them when they're not doing something that would warrant self-defense clearly seems to be disproportional. And so what was done, obviously, to George Floyd, incredibly disproportionate, to say the very least. What was done to the gentleman confronting the police, pushed onto the ground, clearly not proportionate. Even if everything was true about that person, that they were Antifa, that they were using, technology to jam police communications, simply shoving them to the ground and leaving them there to bleed out, clearly disproportionate. Now, another approach people might be using here when they're saying no angel, no hero, and demonizing people, is trying to use a theory of cumulative justice. Again, it's a view of just punishment, or trying to justify it. And the idea, the bad reasoning, is kind of this. The person was bad because of various things. We'll call them P, Q, and R. The person was then killed or hurt by the police. And the idea is that somehow the sum, the accumulation of these bad things, warranted the killing, so the killing was justified. And so the idea here essentially is that if a person has done enough bad stuff, then the sum of this warrants them being harmed or killed. Now, on the face of it, this does have some appeal, because basically it's saying if a person is really bad, then the sum of all their badness allows for them to be justly, harmed or killed. But again, there are some clear criticisms. One is, of course, was there due process for the killing? Because a person could be bad. Suppose a person has committed all kinds of crimes. Is it the case that all those, in fact, did add up to, creating a situation of due process? Now, in the case of, shoving someone down or choking someone out in the street, no matter how bad they were, how many bad things they did, even if that were all true, this would not seem to be due process. So the idea that somehow saying a person is no angel, no hero, and demonizing them, even if all that stuff were true, concluding that, well, since they have all these bad things they did, so killing them in the street or knocking them down from the street, leaving them there would be justified, violates due process. There's also the kind of deeper philosophical question of, cumulative justice. Is it the case that all the bad deeds just kind of add up and then they justify sort of like an extreme treatment? So when people, say of someone who's killed by the police, well, they were no angel or no hero, or demonizing them, talking about them being an antifa, provocateur, the question would be, so even if that were all true, suppose all the accusations were true, it turns out that that gentleman was in fact an antifa provocateur, despite all the evidence to the contrary, and they really were there with a jamming device. Would all those past alleged misdeeds, would they accumulate to justify killing? In other words, to use kind of a silly example, would there be a point at which you could accumulate, say, enough parking tickets where the police could just come and execute you? They just show up at your door and say, you have 2,522 unpaid parking tickets. The punishment for this is cumulative, and the punishment is now death. They just kill you, right there. That would seem clearly crazy. And so the idea that because someone's bad and they've done a lot of bad stuff, that would accumulate and therefore justify them being, just killed in the street seems clearly wrong. Now, this is not to say that if a person does lots and lots and lots of bad stuff, that the penalties cannot accumulate. Again, so going back to the, parking ticket example, suppose you have 2,575 parking tickets. Yeah, you probably have to pay the sum of those because that's the money cost is cumulative. But the idea that somehow these would justify, just ratcheting up the punishment, that becomes much more debatable. And in no case would it ever seem, no matter how many bad things a person has done, that would not seem to ever warrant simply killing them in the street with no due process at all. Now, another way this perhaps is being used, sort of an implied argument, is that the person is guilty of something. And we hear this, occasionally. So the reasoning or bad reasoning would be, the person was guilty of something, whatever that might be. And the person was killed or injured by the police for doing something, called X. Therefore, whatever they were probably guilty of, P or Q or R, justifies this killing or mistreatment. So the killing was justified. Now again, this raises the question of still due process. Even if the person was guilty of something, just killing them or knocking them down in the street would not be due process. Also, think of our principle of punishment. Is our principle of punishment that people just get punished for something, guilty of something, that somehow because they did perhaps something bad, that they deserve that particular punishment? And that hardly seems to follow morally. That someone did something bad, even if that were true, punishing them for something, extremely for that, would seem to be unjustified. So what's the conclusion to take from this? Well, the red herring is always empty rhetoric, proving nothing. It's a distractor. Demonizing is, by definition, always lying. Now, there is kind of a deeper philosophical debate here over what theory of justice we want to accept. Do we expect due process to occur, that people are not simply killed in the streets, and then the reply back is, well, they were no angel, they were no hero, or demonizing, and that seems to be no refutation of due process, saying, well, yeah, it was okay to kill them because they were no angel or no hero, or they were an antifa. That is totally irrelevant. Also, do we want to accept a a notion of proportionality, that the policing force we use in our society needs to be proportional to the misdeed. That killing someone or hurting someone just because it's claimed they're no angel or no hero, or it's alleged that they're, an Antifa, that therefore this warrants, killing them or hurting them badly. Well, this is a moral stance. And the correct moral stance would seem to be that if we believe in a theory of justice, it's got to be proportional. The response needs to be proportional to what the person is doing and their alleged misdeed. So if someone is not presenting, a clear and obvious, threat of violence, again, think of like someone shooting up a school, they're carrying an assault rifle and killing people, yes, clear threat, and the use of deadly force would likely to be warranted there. Someone who's, pinned in the street and there's an officer's, kneeling on their neck, they're presenting zero threat, especially if it's just for a minor crime, totally disproportional. Similarly, when a 75-year-old person is walking towards the police, utterly unarmed, not threatening at all, trying to talk to them, and they're shoved down and simply left laying there bleeding, clearly disproportional. Also, the notion of the cumulative, either, they got what was coming, or cumulative justice, or injustice rather, seems to be not a morally acceptable theory of justice. That people just simply say, well, they're no angel, they're no hero, they did some bad stuff, so being killed in the street is just sort of payoff for, years of alleged bad stuff. And so what we should accept rather is, well, what we claim to accept, namely due process, proportionality, and the idea that we just don't, say people deserve to be punished severely because they happen to, allegedly be bad. Now, of course, what we also have going on, obviously enough, is systematic racism. That is part of the history of the United States, and denying it is comparable to denying the chemical composition of water. It's simply untrue to say that we don't have this. Now, people sometimes, of course, say that policing is broken. On one hand, yes. But on the other hand, it is working as intended, because people have different intentions when it comes to policing. As many critics have said, for example, our good dead friend Emma Goldman, an anarchist, that policing works to maintain social order in the sense of the existing social order. And so what we see is policing working, in large part, working as intended up until it's, exposed. Because the main function, in many cases, seems to be to make minorities and critics afraid of violence against them. And it had been working for quite a while. But now, of course, it seems to be working less. And perhaps change will occur. Or perhaps we'll get the cycle we've generally had, which is person is, killed by the police, there are protests, words are said, and then it simply goes back to the way it was before. But perhaps things will be different this time.